So I stopped too early, so we're picking this up with the next tape. I apologize for that. This will become 3, the square root of 7, minus 14, the square root of 7 over 7, plus 6, the square root of 7. Go ahead and cancel. And again, some of you could do more than a couple more steps in your head if you want, but we'll go ahead and we'll look at this to combine now that we have all three with the same radical. We'll have 9 minus 2, or 7, the square root of 7. Now for the next 4, 41 through 44, it says something I never made a distinction about when I taught the concept. So you might have thought, why is everything going wrong here? Because he's asking you to rationalize the numerator. Now I will say, I've never seen a book do this before. And maybe there's some reason to do that, but typically we rationalize the denominator. And we say that the simple form is to take the radical out of the denominator. But he is saying rationalize the numerator. That means I want to take the take the radical sign out of the numerator. So if I multiplied by square root of 3 over square root of 3, I would get 3 times over the square root of 21. Now, to be honest, I would never ask you to do that. I would always ask you to rationalize the denominator. So if instead I had done that, which maybe is what you assume to do, you would get the square root of 21 over 7, because I would take the radical sign out of the denominator. So if you got that instead, that is fine. What you were doing by terminology is rationalizing the denominator. Okay, so I'm going to give you the answers to the rest of these if you had rationalized the denominator. The first one, or 42, would have been the square root of 7, or the square root of 2, take that out of the denominator, you get the square root of 14 over 2. So these would have been the answers if you had assumed he had wanted you to rationalize the denominators, which would be, again, what I would be asking you to do. Okay, this one, again, if you're rationalizing the denominator, you're kind of confused, because that would be the answer. For rationalizing the numerators, your answers are in the back of the book. And for 44, again, you don't have anything to do, unless you're... So you must have been very confused about this little section here. Just leave it alone. That is in the simplest form. Now, we've already gone over 45, and that's the end of our review. Now, let's begin our new concept on the next page. This concept is called binomials with radicals. Now remember, when you have a binomial, let's say you have a binomial times a binomial, we FOIL. Remember that? So you would get 6x squared. This is way review for you. For our first terms, outer terms would be minus 12x, inner terms would be plus 6x, last terms would be minus 12. Combine my middle terms. Whether you do this mentally or written down, it doesn't matter. 6x squared minus 6x minus 12. It's one idea, review idea. Now, in the next, what if I had something where these would be conjugates of one another? 3x minus 2. Same terms, 3x and 2. The only thing that changes is the sign. Those are called conjugates, remember that? Okay, and the nice thing that happens when you FOIL conjugates is my first term will be 9x squared, my outer term will be minus 6x, my inner term will be plus 6x, and my last term will be minus 4. What happens when you combine the middle terms? They always drop out. Plus minus 6x plus 6x is 0, right? So we're going to base this new concept on these two ideas. You'll find we're really not teaching a new skill. We're just practicing this old skill with radicals. So again, it's just what you used to do, but now you're doing it with radicals. First terms, square root of 12 times the square root of 12 is 12. Outer terms would be plus 7. Well, let's go ahead and simplify it as we're doing it. Square root of 12 is going to be the same as 4 times 3, or 2 square root of 3. So we're going to get plus 7 times 2, 14, the square root of 3. Do you see how I did that? Okay, if this is really, let's do it one more time. If it's 4 times 3, it really simplifies to the square root of 3. And so you're going to have minus 5 times 2, or minus 10, the square root of 3. And the last terms would be minus 35. Combining my middle terms, I'm going to get 12. Actually, let's combine the middle term and the outer terms. 12 minus 35 is going to be negative 13, or I'm sorry, negative 23. And 14 minus 10 is plus 4, the square root of 3. We could have written this as 4 square root of 3 minus 23. Either way, doesn't matter. So, what are you doing? You're foiling. That's your bottom line. And you're just simplifying radicals as you go. Let's look at another example here. Probably most of you will find this easier to go ahead and write this out and do FOIL. First terms, outer terms would be minus the square root of 33. Inner terms would be minus the square root of 3. Last terms would be plus 3. Combine these, you're going to get 14. Combine these, you're going to get minus 2, the square root of 33. Let's do our third example. Well, this is nice. What would I call these? When the first term and the second term are the same, and all you change is the sign. We have conjugates. What's true of conjugates when they're FOILed? The middle terms drop out. So I'm just going to pay attention to the first terms. 3 times 3 is 9, and square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is times 5, minus the last terms. 4 times 4 is 16. So this will be 45 minus 16, and that's going to be 29. So that was nice and easy. Now, this is the trickier one, because whenever we have two terms in the denominator, like this with a radical, and we want to get rid of that radical, we have to multiply by the conjugate. Why? Because notice what happened in the last example. When he was having me multiply by the conjugate, and the middle terms drop out, which are the only ones that still have a radical. So the first terms had no radical, and the last terms had no radical. And that's how I'm going to get rid of a binomial radical in the denominator. So the conjugate would be square root of 5 plus square root of 3. So of course I'm going to multiply that in the numerator also, which means that I have a FOIL above and a FOIL below. So let's go ahead and FOIL them out, remembering in the denominator you don't only pay attention to the first and last terms, because the conjugates drop out, or the middle terms drop out in a conjugate. Okay, so prove it to yourself if you need to. Okay, if you're not comfortable with that idea, just go ahead and FOIL the whole thing out and combine it. So let me go ahead and do some work for you, and you do it on your own and compare. Now, I tend to write the whole number first and then the radical. He wrote this as pulling the negative out because it's shared by both the first term and the second term. And so that he wrote this as minus in front. I already have it here. And then square root of 15 minus 7. Plus 7, if we're pulling that out, over 2. And notice when I pull this out, I have to be very careful. It's way before this division sign, so I can tell that it's to be really distributed if you need to do anything else with it. All right, so I tend to prefer this form. What the point is you want to be able to recognize that this form here is the very same as this form, and they're both the same as this form. Okay, so really you would want to definitely simplify that. Okay, but both of these, problem 1 or written without the parentheses, you can clean this up a little bit. Okay, I can either write it that way or I can write it this way. And, and those are the same answers. All right, now let's look at the oral practice on page 536. And we'll do these orally. So go ahead and get out your book. And it says, give the conjugate. The conjugate is the same terms with the different sign. So the first one would be square root of 3 minus the square root of 2. B, the square root of 5 plus the square root of 7. Very easy idea here. C would be the square root of 11 plus 4. And D would be 9 minus the square root of 6. Not changing any term, just changing the sign. Give the result of multiplying these conjugates. Now this is a better idea because you recognize that the middle terms drop out. So it's if you look at E, very simply I'm thinking 3 when I multiply the first minus 2 or 1. See how that works? So you can do these very quickly in your head. F, square root of 7 times square root of 7 is 7. It'll always be a minus sign because the conjugate, the signs are going to be different. 7 minus 5 or 2. Let's do the others just orally. 2 minus 10 is negative 8. H, 5 minus 3. Okay. What H is a little trickier because the 3 is not under the radical sign, so be careful. It should be 5 minus 9 or negative 4. Next one, the first one's not under the radical, so just be careful. 16 minus 3 is 13. J, 7 minus 2 times 2 is 4. 7 minus 4 is 3. And give the result of squaring these binomials. Now we're just going to do it without writing it out. I'm going to say 5 plus 2. Nope, I'm not. Let's think harder. Okay, let me show you. I had my head still in the conjugate world. Okay, so we don't have conjugates. Nothing's dropping out. But the first term will be 5. The outer and inner term will be the square root of 10 twice. And the last term would be 4 plus 2. Combining, you'll get 7 plus 2, the square root of 10. Now let's see if we can do the next one without any writing. We'll have square root of 3 minus the square root of 2 squared. So for the first one, I'm thinking 3. For the last one, I'm thinking, okay. Let's go ahead and think first and then last so that I can combine them in my head. Okay, so I will have 3 minus, that would be the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 would be 3. The last terms would be square root of 2 times the square root of 2. Minus times minus is going to be a plus. So I'm thinking 3 plus 2. Do you see that? 5 minus 2, the square root of 6. Let's see if we can do that again. These would get a little bit harder. You might not want to do these in your head, but some of you will. And so let's say we square these. Squaring the first, I'm going to get 3 plus, squaring the last, 3 plus 4 is 7. Middle term would be 2, double it, plus 4, square root of 3. Let's look at the last one. 3 minus the square root of 2 squared. Squaring the first term, I'm going to get 9. Squaring the last term, I'm going to get minus 2. 9 minus 2 is 7. Middle term, multiply them together and double it. Okay, so that's a good little exercise. Now I'm going to do, let's see, the circled problems. You don't know it's circled, but I'm going to do just about 3 or 4 more problems for examples. So you're distributing, and I like to go ahead and write it out, or just do it in my head. Okay, but I recognize that they'll have a 5 in common when I multiply the 10 times the 5. And so we'll pull that out and leave the square root of 2 under the radical. And so you're just distributing here, and that's your answer. Let's do another one. Now for this one, we're thinking FOIL. Think all 4 terms here. Don't have to rush to do it in your head. Okay, whenever you're comfortable. First terms would be 6. Outer terms would be plus 4, square root of 6. Inner terms would be minus 7, square root of 6. Last terms would be minus 28. Gathering the first and the last terms, I'll get minus 22. Gathering the middle terms, because they have the same radical, I'll get minus 3, the square root of 6. First thing I notice here is that these are conjugates, so that makes it nice for me because I don't have to pay attention to my middle terms. I simply get 13 minus 2 equals 11. And let's do one more. When I have a square root or a root in the denominator, I want to remove it because that's the simplest form. And here I need to Go ahead and remove it by conjugate, multiplying both the top and the bottom by the conjugate. Now go ahead and distribute. Remember that the middle terms drop out in the conjugate. That's really the whole reason I'm doing this. And so I only pay attention to the first and last terms in the denominator. Don't forget to divide to simplify. And let me do one last problem for you. We need to multiply the bottom by the conjugate, or the denominator. Go ahead and FOIL the numerator, and remember that the bottom is a conjugate when you're foiling, so ignore the middle terms. And the only reason we ended up with this one rather than this one is you don't want to leave that negative sign in the denominator. So I distributed it through the numerator. Okay, so what will your homework be? So you'll just be doing 12.4. You'll be doing quite a few problems here. Your quiz 18 will be sent by email, and you need to mail it back by postal service, just like always, okay, for quizzes and tests. Now, you only need to mail back when I say that things are due. So do this, have your parents sign it, do it in a closed book environment, and put it away. And when I tell you the next section of things to mail. Now, last lesson, I told you what things were due to mail. So there was a packet there to mail. But this does not have to be included in that packet. You can start a new packet and mail it when I tell you to. All right? Or you can include it if you want to get it done just in the next. The last packet needs to be done. The ones I enumerated on 31A need to be done by postmarked by Friday. So if you want to include this, you can, but you don't have to. After I've said a section to mail, then you just gather them up until I ask you to mail them again. Okay, God bless.